They literally parked it in my father's parking spot, and they blew up the USAFE headquarters. So I get home and I go up and my mom is there and I said, "Mom, I just heard USAFE headquarters was bombed." And she said, "I know, your father is missing." Welcome to Spark Me, a podcast for women who know life is just getting interesting.
Each week, we spark great conversations, share lived experiences, real resources, and tap into the collective wisdom that comes from learning together.
If you're looking for connection, not perfection, fresh ideas, and a community where you truly belong,
then pull up a chair. You're in the right place. Welcome to Spark Me. Well, hey, Liz. Welcome to another episode of Spark Me.
Well, I'm excited to be on the other side of this microphone.
I know.
It's going to be very awkward being the one answering questions, not asking questions.
Yes, because today is your origin story, like a great Marvel superhero, which is kind of how I think of you. So this is really exciting for me to be able to dive into your past. I know there's a lot through doing this podcast that I've learned about you. Because, it's just, as I'm sure as we get into this, when you and your dad wrote his book together, you learned a lot about him that you didn't know. This is kind of like these things uncover and peel back the layers of the onion. And I'm really excited about it. So, and I'm excited for our listeners to find out who you are and, what brought you here to Spark Me and the sort of deep, rich background that you have that is so interesting, Liz. It's really great. So if it's okay with you, I just want to dive right in.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to start. I actually don't want to start at the beginning. I want to start sort of in the middle-ish towards the end. Well, not even middle, I guess towards recent times, which is when you invited me to lunch, right? You invited me to lunch and we sat down. And you said you'd been thinking of starting a podcast for women that touched on a lot of the things that women are going through right now in this time of life, sort of sandwiched between raising kids and aging parents and being at the top of their careers or trying to figure out what's next. And you chose me to sit down and have that conversation with. And I want to just go back to that time and even right before that lunch. What were you thinking? And then what led you to invite me? And, just take me from there because I was so honored. Right?
Oh, well, honestly, and I think you were going through the same thing independently. So it was sort of fortuitous that we ended up connecting on this idea. But I was having these conversations with my girlfriends all the time. And we were talking about nobody tells you about this part of life. You're dealing with hormonal changes, which you don't really understand the extent to which those are happening. You're not sleeping at night. You've got kids that you're worrying about. You have parents that you're worrying about. You have high pressure jobs. I mean, and then, in some cases, a spouse who's like, "Hey, what about me?" And, and, and the only place that you're getting good support and information is from those, dinners and lunches with your girlfriends, right? When you go have a glass of wine and, vent about whatever. And I thought, gosh, I would love to have a podcast that I could tap into because I've been listening to podcasts for many years, and I would, I have one podcast that I listen to that's like two guys, and it's a very like bro talk kind of podcast, and I do really enjoy it. But I was like, why is there not something like this for women? Talking so that we can share what we're going through. And so that was probably like, I don't know, 2022, 2023. And I talked to a bunch of people about it. I talked to like Tracy Silingo about it. And I said, don't you think this would be a good idea? And she said, yes, you should do it. And I talked to Christine Kaisinger about it and all these different folks. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do it by myself. Who could I do it with? And I have always admired you, Michele, because you bring such positivity and energy to everything that you do.
Mhm.
And that is, I wanted that, positivity and energy. I'm a pretty positive person, and I wanted when people listen to this to, to come away maybe a little bit smarter, but for sure a little bit uplifted. And I knew that you would be the perfect person. You're the only person, um, like from day one when I started thinking about this, I'm like, who would I do it with? And I'm like, your name immediately was the one that came to my mind.
Thank you.
So anyway, that's how. And then I sat down with you. We had lunch. I made lunch, scheduled lunch with you. We got together. Actually, no, it was like the universe. I'm going to step back because I took my dad to like some eye doctor appointment. He was having like some sort of minor eye surgery in Scranton, and I had a couple of hours to kill. And so I had brought a book with me, and I went to one of my favorite places, but breakfast lunch places in Scranton. And I was sitting there by myself. And do you remember you like knocked on the window? You saw
That's
me,
right.
and
Right. Yeah.
and you had
I was
and
coming
you
down
had
from my office upstairs. Yes.
exactly. You had bought
Right.
that building. I didn't even realize that. And you had moved your offices upstairs, and you're like, come see my new offices. And so I like went up there, and it was like in the back of my mind, I'm like, this is the universe's way of
Mhm.
saying you need to move forward with this idea. And
Mhm.
then we got together for lunch, I don't know, a few months later, and kicked it off. So,
That's because the universe had heard me too, saying something
mhm,
really similar, and I think we were both telling the universe that we wanted to do this thing, and that was the bringing us together, right?
yeah.
Because I had been kicking around an idea for a podcast for a long time that even put a podcast room in my office.
Yeah, exactly,
Right?
exactly.
And it just was like what you said just dovetailed perfectly with those ideas, and literally um, that day, probably that day, but then when we had that lunch, Spark Me was born. That was the spark of Spark Me. And I want
Yeah.
to get into how we know each other, but I first want to go back because I really want people who are watching and listening this to know you. Because Liz, you're so impressive and such. It's like when we talk about sort of these heroes that walk among us and these incredible women who, are next to us at the event, not necessarily on the stage, although you are often on the stage too. This is what we're talking about, right? Um, so let me just go back a little bit to little Liz, right? Childhood Liz, right? I I learned, through our time on Spark Me that you actually grew up moving pretty frequently because your dad was in the military. So what
Mhm.
tell me about that childhood experience and where you lived. I know you lived in Korea and Germany and lots of places. So I want you to talk about how you grew up as a child and how that was formative to you and why. Like you said your dad was in the military. So bring us back to Liz living in Korea.
Well, I'm glad you asked this question because I think that this is something that if you haven't experienced military life, you don't understand, and I really want to share it because it's so important. I think that growing up a military brat, which is what we call ourselves, was probably the best thing that ever happened in my life. Now think about that. I've had some pretty amazing things happen in my life, and I look back and so much of who I am was created in those first, 12, 13 years of life where my dad was a colonel in the Air Force. He was a well-known fighter pilot within the Air Force. I mean, he had a lot of, you know, he was a little bit of a rock star in that community.
Totally.
And we moved every 2 years. So I've lived, I was born in Arizona, and, I've lived in Alabama, Washington, D.C., Virginia. I've lived in South Korea, Turkey, Germany, Ohio. Um, I'm missing someplace, but in any event, We moved a lot every couple of years. That's just the life of, that was how my dad's career was in the military. And the thing about the military that people don't understand is that military people are driven by service,
Mm,
service to their country, service to others. They always put that service component above themselves, and they're very well trained. Um, they're pretty smart, I would say. In fact, I'd say they're, at least the folks that I was around were really the best of the best. And they want to make they want to make an impact on the world. Like, so imagine growing up where those are all the people that you're surrounded
mm,
by all the time.
yeah.
And that's what it's like to be a military brat. Um, and I never had that sense of place. Like, you have Scranton as your center of, this is where I grew up, and this is home. We didn't have that because we were moving around so much, but our center and our home became the family.
Mm,
And so I have an older brother and an older sister and my parents, and that unit of 5 was home. So it didn't matter the geographic location, wherever they were, that was going to be, where home was. And it was just very impactful. The other thing is that, you see the world is a much bigger place than your hometown,
mhm,
and that people are doing really important things, and you're much more aware of geopolitical issues and events. I mean, at 12, I could have told you what was going on in the Middle East. I'm not sure that a 12-year-old, that grows up in a small town in Nebraska would never necessarily be able to do that. I mean, maybe they do, but we were like living history. And and that was just incredible. I mean, I wish more people understood the value of our military men and women and what they do on an everyday basis. And I wish more people, frankly, would encourage their kids to go into the military, because it is such an honorable thing. And it is such a service driven thing. And no matter, if you stay in 4 years or 20 years, you are gonna come out a better person, when you come out. So, so I would say that that was the biggest, impact in my um, early part of my life, and, it definitely impacted how I lead today and how I'm sort of driven, towards helping community and building community. Um, so it had so much impact in my life.
So many things running through my head with that from service, which is, you growing up around the military. And these are people who, I mean, this is service at the deepest level of what it means because they're willing to put themselves in harm's way and literally give their lives
Mhm,
to the service of their country, right?
mhm,
And the belief in something greater than themselves, and so that other people can continue to live under this banner of freedom. And that is like, I don't know if there's anything greater than that, right? So you sort of grew up in that and seeing it. And then
mhm.
the perspective of living in all these places, I'm sure just opened your mind in ways that are almost probably indescribable. I remember when I first started traveling, like all these perceptions I had of other places were just so wrong, right? Just like
Yeah.
completely upside down, and vice versa too. There was a young woman who had spent time in. She was from China, and she was at Lafayette, and she was shadowing me. And I asked her her impression of like the United States, and her impression was like basically New York City from all the shows that she watched, and, like, there's a murder every day, and it's very dangerous over here, you know what I mean?
Mhm,
And that's not what it was like at all. I was like, "Oh, that's so funny." And then just, how this started forming your impressions of community, right? Because you lived in so many different communities and leadership. So let's talk from there. Was there a moment when, you know, throughout all of this and watching leadership in action, when you started to begin to step into leadership naturally?
I don't I don't know if it was a moment as much as it was expectation.
Mm,
And, I've had this conversation with a couple of friends, and it's very interesting, how different people are raised. In our family, we every night we sat down for dinner together, if we could. Now, my dad was gone a lot, so it wasn't that we were together as the whole every night, but when we sat down, we talked about what was going on in the world. Um, our opinions were listened to and valued, even when they were not fully. They didn't come from a full education. They didn't have the full history or background. So, and then our parents expected us to succeed. Um, and when we didn't succeed at something, you know, they, you know, they were disappointed, but they were not nearly as disappointed as you were
mm,
disappointed in yourself. And so, you'd work harder next time. And I think that growing up where your parents have expectations for you is really important. And I think a lot of people, in talking to different people, that they did not grow up that way, which I find so interesting. Like, why wouldn't, like, we were expected to read. We were expected to, do public speaking. There were just all these expectations on us, and we just did them. I mean, it wasn't like, well, I don't want to do it. There wasn't that discussion, you know.
yeah,
And I think that that was also a real gift. That that we had expectations when we were growing up. I'm not sure everybody gets that. And that really led to more a natural progression to leadership, to your question,
yeah.
um, in my opinion.
So how did you end up? Because from when I met you, you were very I was so surprised to find out you didn't grow up in, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, right? Because you were so ingrained in the community at that point, right? And you
Hmm.
really had made a commitment to making a difference there, which I'm sure you do everywhere you go. But so from traveling around the world as a army brat with your dad, um, to landing in Northeastern Pennsylvania, how did that happen? And then where did you personally your professional life go from there?
Well, it was interesting. So first of all, I have to clarify it was an Air Force brat. I would
Sorry, Air
not
Force
be
brat.
a true military brat if I did not clarify the branch of service. And anybody in the military just laughed because they got that reference. But my dad, we were living in Germany, and we had a very impactful thing happen. Um, we My father was doing some. He was the head of, like, director of operations in Germany or something like that. I can't remember the exact title, but it was at the
It
U.S.
was
Air
a big
Force
deal.
Europe.
It was a big
Yeah, it
deal.
was a big deal. U.S. Air Force headquarters, but the title was ambiguous enough that he was like a utility guy. Where there was an issue, um, they would put him. And he had just been at the Pentagon, and they had asked him to rewrite the uh, after the Vietnam War, they brought him to the Pentagon to rewrite the war plans for what would be the next war. I mean, nobody knew what it was, but they were using sort of, you know, different futurists and things like that to figure out where would the next engagement occur, and how would the United States be prepared for that. And so he was in charge of writing out that plan, presenting it to Congress, and all of that. And then um and then we ended up going to Europe, and so he was negotiating arms deals as part of his job, and he was also doing some intelligence work on the side. And in the course of doing that, I didn't. it was funny because I didn't notice right away, but whenever I would get on the bus, to go to school, there was always a car following the bus.
Oh my god.
And I didn't, like, think anything of it, and then when I go to, like, the youth center, like, a couple blocks away from our house, there would always be these, like, 2 people outside the youth center, and, like, nobody ever said to me that we were being protected and shadowed, but we
Mhm.
were. And then in 19 I wanna say it was, like, 1981, maybe it was 1982, but, the, Baader-Meinhof, terrorist group in Germany, uh, drove a VW Bug in somehow they got it onto base and, USAFE, and they literally parked it in my father's parking spot, and they blew up the USAFE headquarters. And,
What?
I was waiting, I was waiting at the bus stop to go to school. Now, remember, I just told you how, like, as military kids, you're just much more you're, like, more geopolitically aware. So the bus never comes to pick us up to take us to school. So, after 45 minutes, you're like, "Okay, well, I guess we'll walk home." And so we're walking, home, and kids are peeling off as we hit their houses kinda thing, and one of the kids, her father was the head of the military police at Ramstein Air Force Base, which is where USAFE headquarters are and is, and she went into the house, and then she came running out, and she said, "They just bombed USAFE." Now imagine a group of 12-year-olds who
Oh
are
my
talking about a terrorist event, like, almost matter-of-factly,
yeah.
right?
Oh my god.
So I get home, and I go up, and my mom is there, and I said, "Mom, I just heard USAFE headquarters was bombed." And she said, "I know, your father is missing."
Jeez.
And I completely lost it because I just, I don't know, I just, like, whatever, when somebody tells you at
Yeah.
12 that, your father is missing, it was very emotional. And I will never forget, like, my mother was a stay-at-home mom, and I think you sort of, when you're a kid, you grow up sort of discounting, well, she just, cooks and cleans and, takes care of the family. And in that moment, I'm crying and she's hugging me and she's saying, "It's going to be okay. No
Mm.
matter what happened, it's going to be okay." And she just kept saying that to me. And then I was like, okay. And literally what happened was my father, um, he it's actually a family joke. I am notoriously take long showers, and I happened to get into the shower before he did that morning, and, he was late going into work as a result of it. Otherwise, he totally would have been there at the time, and he got, he didn't he was late, and so he wasn't there when the bomb went off, but as soon as the bomb went off, because of his position there, he was immediately, immersed into the, investigation
Mm.
and helping with survivors and stuff like that. And he had asked, one of his, folks that worked for him to call us to let us know that he was okay, and somehow that never happened. So we went this entire, like, day or so, day and a half, thinking that he had been killed. There was another part of the story that, like, right when it happened, somebody, called my mom and said, "Is Colonel Graham at home?" And she said, "No." And he said, "Okay, he's missing. We've had an incident here at the base." So she had that going on. I'm saying, my friend said that the base was bombed, blah, blah, blah. We all know that, it is. And he's missing and no word. So, we're thinking the worst. And, he eventually comes home like a day or so later. And my mother very nicely said, "I'm done. This has been such a great ride for 28 years. I've done 4 tours with you in Vietnam. We've done some things in the Middle East. I've been in DC at the Pentagon with you, all these different, adventures that they'd been on." And she said, "But this one, we're done. I'm
Yeah.
taking Liz. We're going to move back to the States." And to my dad's credit, and he was on the list to be promoted to general. And to my dad's credit, he turned down the promotion
Oh,
and said, "You have supported me for the last, 28 years while I've pursued my dreams. And I'm in it, I'll retire."
wow.
And we ended up um, randomly sort of moving to Mountaintop, Pennsylvania. And I ended up going to school at a local prep school here in Pennsylvania.
What
So
age were you at that time?
we moved back here when I was 13, I think,
Okay.
12 or 13.
So very
So,
formative years were spent around the world,
mhm,
different places.
yes,
And
yes.
by
Um,
the time you got back here, you had a lot of life already under your belt, including thinking you had lost your dad. And
yeah,
then it must have felt like a miracle that you didn't. What was that moment
yeah.
like? Found out
It
that
was
he
I
what was
mean, it
that?
was such a roller coaster, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you were at the sort of you know, the depths of despair to like, "Oh my God, you're alive," kind of thing. And I was, I'm sure I probably was over emotional, but I mean, no, I mean, looking back on it, but no
The
judgment. I
capacity.
mean, you, you you are what you are gonna feel what you feel kind of thing, and that was how I felt in the moment. But yeah, it was a big I remember my mom had a sister that lived in Kingston,
Mm,
Pennsylvania, and that's honestly why we ended up here. We actually had a home in Albuquerque that uh, we had for several years, that we always thought we would retire to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And um, but we decided that we have very little family in the United States. Wouldn't it be nice to live closer to family? And so we sold the place in Albuquerque, and we settled in Mountaintop, Pennsylvania. And it was very different. I will say, acclimating.
sure.
And I was definitely an oddity.
How so? How so? How were you an oddity?
Well, I had just moved. I mean, I remember I was out sick one day at school, and I don't know, and I came back to school the next day, and somebody said, "Well, how was Germany?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "Well, the rumor was that you went back to Germany, to visit friends." I'm like, "Germany's like an 8-hour plane trip. I mean, it's not like going to Philadelphia." you But there was just no and it wasn't their fault. I mean, that they would have no reason to understand, that. But so I was just sort of it.
And what was that like for you acclimating? And, did it take some time to realize that every day is now I'm going to be in the same place and, I'm in the United States now because it sounded like for most of your childhood you did not live here. And this
Mhm.
was the place that the military was protecting and advocating for that entire time.
Mhm.
Now you're finally here. What was that like? And during high school, which is like some of the toughest years sometimes for,
I know.
kids.
I know. I went to a great school. It was I had a small class, so it was nice. The kids were nice. I mean, it was just that it wasn't, I was just odd to everybody else. I mean, I think I'm perfectly normal, truthfully, but I was just an unknown, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Nobody
New.
knew
You were
me from elementary school. Nobody, they didn't know our family, because our family wasn't like fourth generation from here, kind of
yeah.
thing. And so it was just, it was just different. But one of the other great things about being a military brat and moving around all the time is that you're very adaptable. And so I learned very early on how to make friends
Yeah.
and to adapt to a new environment because every 2 years I had to go to the playground and say, "Hey, I'm Liz. I'm the new kid. Can I play with you or can I be friends with you or whatever?" And that was a life skill that was fantastic, and
Absolutely.
useful.
So you finish high school, off to
Mhm,
college. Now let's get into
mhm,
your professional career. All right.
mhm.
So how did you choose it and where did you end up and how did you come back?
Well, I went to University of Pittsburgh, and I made great friends at Pitt. It probably was not the right school for me, and I really didn't. I am very much apparently somebody that likes to work, and I liked and I like to see. Okay, you take A, so you get to B to C to D. And I'm how it is when you go to college and, you're taking, like, philosophy classes and, like, I don't understand how this is gonna help me. So I I actually stepped away from school and, after a couple of years, and I came home and I'm like, "I don't know what I wanna do with my life," and my parents were like, "Well, okay, you can stay here for a little while." And then it was like, how they say, like, a guest should never stay longer than 3 days? Well,
Yeah, the fish.
I was
The
like
fish. Yeah.
3 or 4 months. Yeah, exactly. I was like 3 or 4 months in, and then my parents were like, "So, what is the plan? Because
Yeah.
right now we see I had a job and, I was living my life, but I really had no direction." I said, "I don't know." And so I ended up going back to school in Philadelphia, and my thought was maybe I would, you know, go become a lawyer. Like maybe I'd go to law school, and it was really nothing more than I really didn't have any other ideas, and so I ended up getting a job at a law firm outside of Philadelphia, first as a legal secretary to their partner there, and then I went to paralegal school at night, and so that I could help him with trial work and depositions and stuff like that. And I hated legal work. It's like, I am definitely not going to be an attorney. This is not the path for me. I love lawyers, don't get me wrong, but I could see, I was doing some of the work as a paralegal. I'm like, yep, this is not going to be my life's path. And, and at that time, my sister wanted to move to DC, and I was like, well, I've got nothing going on. Maybe I'll go work. I'll go to DC. Politics always sort of interested me. And so we moved to DC. We didn't have jobs. I take that back. I had a job. She didn't have a job, but we found an apartment, or a townhouse, and we moved to Old Town Alexandria,
Mm.
and which was comfortable for me because I had a college boyfriend that you know lived there. Um, and uh, and I got a job working for the largest dry cleaning equipment company in the United States. They were a Korean owned company, and they liked me because I had some conversational Korean, and I understood the culture, having lived there for a couple of years. And they wanted me to work with the EPA, and their dry cleaning
Environmental Protection Agency.
customers.
Yeah.
Yes,
EP.
yes.
Sorry. Just in case people don't know,
Yes,
Environmental Protection Agency, the federal arm of the Environmental
exactly.
Protection. Yeah.
And this was a very successful company, and everybody in the company was Korean except for me. And it was a culture shock. Like, now I had lived in Korea, so I
Yeah.
was like, "No, this is gonna be great." I love Koreans. They are fantastic people. Um, but they are think about a dry cleaner. Think about
Yeah.
how hard a dry cleaner works,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Long hours all the time. Well, that's how this company was. And I remember sitting there, I was like 3 months in, it was becoming clear to me, probably to them too, that, this was not gonna be my forever job. And I remember the one woman that I worked with there said, "Oh, good. Christmas is on a Saturday this year, so, they normally worked Saturdays, but we'll probably get it off, because." And I was like, "What are you talking about? You don't get Christmas off?"
Yes.
Like, okay, I've given up Memorial Day. I'm come to terms with Labor Day, but I draw the line at Christmas, okay? I must have Christmas off. And so in any event, and this is in DC. And so I looked for another job and I put my resumes out to a bunch of different places. And I was fairly certain that I really wanted this job as a legislative assistant for USAA Insurance Company. And I really wrote a great cover letter. So I felt very confident that they were going to call me based on this cover letter. And I wasn't getting the phone call. I was so surprised. And in the meantime, this law firm called me right away and they said, "Look, we're looking for somebody for one of our big partners here at the firm." And and I said, I don't know that I really want to go back into the legal environment. And I I said, "I don't think you can meet my salary." Like, I was so not, and she said, "Well, the salary pays this." And it was $5,000 higher than my upper limit. And I was like, "Well, I'll take a meeting." And so I interviewed and I met this was just a great firm. And I met the partner and I was like, "I want to work here. This place is doing things. It's exciting." They were connected in DC with a lot of really, they were just doing some pretty cool things. And, I literally came home from that, um, interview and got a phone call, that evening from USAA. And they said, "We want to bring you in for an interview." And I said, "Honestly, I just interviewed with this law firm. I know they're going to offer me, and I'm not going to even take the meeting because I don't want to have two difficult decisions.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with the law firm." And this woman said, "You know what? We received 250, I don't know, something like that. Oh, a couple of hundred um, resumes, and we narrowed it down to 10. And you were one of the 10. And honestly, within the 10, you were my number one." And she said, "Are you sure you won't take the meeting?" And I said, "I'm sure." And she said, "Here's my telephone number. If you ever change your mind or you ever decide to leave the law firm, call me."
Wow.
And it was like after, I was like, I knew I wrote a kick-ass cover letter.
Like,
To
ew, great.
reaffirm to my faith in humanity that, that I got that call.
I love it.
But anyway, I worked for this law firm and they were fantastic. And I moved up within the ranks of the firm. So I was like their marketing person. And part of what we were in an acquisition mode with the law firm, and part of my job was to help integrate these firms that we were acquiring all over the country into sort of the mothership in DC. And then the other part of my job was to execute on the strategic plan. So I was part of the strategic planning session at the firm. I was in that on that sort of board in that group. There were two other women and me. I was the only non-lawyer in the room, and only the third woman. And I was there as I'm the worker. You guys make the plan, and I go figure out how we execute it. And I remember this female partner, Lynn Shapiro Snyder, very bright woman. They were all bright. Every single person in that room was super bright. Um, she said, you know, "Healthcare decisions are largely made by women. But when you look at the boards of healthcare companies around this
Mm.
country, none of them have women on their boards. We need to make that change, and we need to get more women on boards of healthcare companies. And you could hear a pin drop after she made that statement. Every person in that room, male or female, was sitting there like a light bulb just went off.
Mhm.
And I remember the founding partner, Steve Epstein, said, "Well, Lynn, what would you need to make that happen?" And she said, "I want to start a senior executive women's network for the healthcare industry, and um, and I want the money to do it." And he said, "You got it?" And she turned to me and she said, "We're going to work on this together."
Wow.
And that began my journey. And that honestly was the moment that I really found my path. And that
Mm.
was, sort of, I started studying. I until that point, I'd never looked at the makeup of a board of a publicly traded company, and I did not know that there were no women on these boards.
Right.
That all the decisions were made by men, and there's nothing. I mean, there's nothing wrong except for it wasn't reflective of the client base, right? So you needed diversity at that level in order to have sort of, the honestly, the best management and thought leadership for all of those companies comes from a diverse set of opinions at the board level.
Yeah.
And, there's a company called Catalyst, which, their whole organization is geared towards getting more women on publicly traded boards. I spent a lot of time with the Catalyst folks learning about the issue and how they were addressing it. And Lynn and I created this organization, which became Women Business Leaders in Healthcare, and WBL, as we call it for short. By the way, you can tell that I have no marketing acumen because I actually created that name, Women Business Leaders in Healthcare, which is such a mouthful and has no, like, you know, zhuzh at all.
Catchy, yeah.
And
But it is exactly what
but
it is. So that's,
it is very
it's
clear.
not a wonder.
It is very clear. But today, WBL is just celebrated its 25th anniversary,
Wow.
1,500
Congratulations.
members, and
Wow.
they have put more women on the boards of healthcare companies across the United States and really made an impact
Mm.
for women in healthcare. And I'm so proud. I mean, I launched the first retreat, if you will, bringing together all of these big deal healthcare women to see if we wanted to launch WBL. I did all of that, and then when WBL launched, I I moved on in my career, but I've stayed connected to both the firm and to WBL, and I am so proud to have been there in that room at the beginning. It changed the course of my life 100%.
That that is so profound because that moment ended up impacting my life, right? So
Hmm.
this is the ripple in the pond again, right? Um,
Yeah,
because I guess if we fast forward just a little bit, there's so much here. I have so much
I
to unpack and so
know.
many questions still to ask, but I want to keep moving. So because it also reminded me of Beth Toohey and Procter and Gamble realizing that women were not being represented and changing that, and it made such a big difference there. But the ripple in the pond here is you eventually come back to Northeastern Pennsylvania, and I'd like to see how you get here, but and take this WBL experience to Northeastern Pennsylvania in a new form called Circle 200. So can you get us from WBL to Circle 200? Because Circle 200 is where I enter the picture and how that has impacted my life. Which I'm
Sure.
just saying is you just can see this like massive impact uh, that that's even absorbed me, right? Like
Oh,
many other women. I'm just saying it's like you probably don't even know how many, but so go ahead. So WBL and And what happens
So
next?
yeah, so I was doing my thing at Epstein Becker, and we were launching WBL. I literally spent a year of my life absorbed in creating this organization, doing all the research behind why it was important, why it was needed, blah blah blah. And while I was doing that, I was flying around the country integrating these different practices. I was in Atlanta and just all over, into the firm. And I barely saw my family. I mean, I just was, where's Liz today? Well, I think she's in New York today or wherever. And I'll never forget, I came home for Memorial Day weekend, and I went out to play golf with my parents, and I ran into the parents of one of my good friends in high school. And I was like, "Oh, where's Pam? Is she in this weekend?" And her parents said, "No, no, she and her husband Kevin were going to the Charlotte 500 race." And I said, "Oh, that's amazing." And the next morning, I woke up, and on Good Morning America was a story that there was a helicopter accident
Mm,
coming out of the Charlotte 500. And everybody was killed, including my friend Pam and her husband Kevin.
so sad.
And I was really shook, because even though I hadn't seen Pam in a couple of years, she'd gotten married and moved to North Carolina. But when you grow up with people like that, right? I mean, we played
Mhm.
competitive golf together. We worked at the local pro shop together. I mean, we skied together. We did so much together. Um, and at that age, I was in my late 20s, early 30s. It was like shocking.
Mhm.
And so it really caused me to take some time. I'm still working and doing all the crazy stuff, but on the side, I actually went to see a therapist for the first time in my life because I was really struggling with the impact of this death and was I living the life I wanted to live? Because now I've just been shown very quickly that life is short.
Mm,
And so it took me about 6 months, but I made the decision ultimately that I wanted to spend more time with my family. That what I was really missing was my family. And so I was pretty well known in the legal marketing industry. And so as soon as I sort of put feelers out there with a headhunter that I was open to something closer to Pennsylvania, um, I immediately got some job offers. And I called my brother and I said, I'm going to take this job. I'm super excited. I'm going to be able to see you guys more. And he said, "Well, I never thought you'd leave the law firm." He said, you know, "Would you ever consider doing what you do at Epstein Becker and Green for the family company?" My father had started an investment firm, and I was like, "Well, gosh, I never thought about it." So he recruited me, and one of the big recruiting, I will tell you, anybody that works in a family business, um, they don't wow you with the pay compensation package, okay? You're not gonna get paid at the top of the market. So, it wasn't the compensation package that drew me, but the idea that I could make an impact in a s in a smaller town, really was attractive to me. The fact that I could, grow something that I had ownership in,
Mm,
super attractive to me. And and I didn't feel like there was any downside because if it didn't work out, I would just go get another job in legal marketing. I had a reputation. I was just very confident that that would not be a
and
problem.
you wanted to come home to spend time with your family, and this was, like, as with your family as you could get.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know if I expected to spend this much time with my family. I also moved in with my parents and when I was like 30 because I was like looking for a house. And I'm like, wow.
I went all in. I really
I
leaned
have,
into
I have
that.
really done a 180 here. But when I moved to this area, one of the things that I was looking for was something like WBL. and I couldn't find it. It didn't exist. And I happened to have lunch with a couple of women and I was like, we need something like this. I just created this in DC. It would be great here. And one of the women had just gone through the International Women's Forum, and she was interested in creating a women's group. And I said, well, great, let's do it. I've got the blueprint because I literally just did this. And so we launched what became Circle 200. Um, it it started out with a senior executive women of Northeastern Pennsylvania was the it was something like that. Women's Forum or something
Yeah.
like that was the original name. So you can see my marketing footprint all over it. But we ultimately changed the name to Circle 200, and we launched this by invitation only women's executive group in Northeastern Pennsylvania, and really just as a way to bring us all together and to also get more women on boards, because Northeastern Pennsylvania was just like the rest of the country.
Mhm.
And when you looked at the makeup of boards, there might be like one or two women. That was on a 40-person board. So
Wow. Yeah, and that's where I came in. I think Circle 200 was, actively inviting my sister, who is very hard to get because our family business is quite large, industrial linen supply, uniform and linen supply. And, and I had just started an architecture firm. It was like me and I think an intern maybe. Um, and somehow I just rode her coattails into Circle
no.
200. And I was invited, which was lovely. And it is an incredible group of women, and I feel so lucky to be part of it. Just you know, great conversations. So much has been learned, and we have these dine arounds because you just said Circle 200 came out of a lunch, right? Like a conversation with women
Hmm.
around lunch. It's always food, wine, right?
No,
But
exactly.
and
Exactly.
and one of the things that Circle 200 does is we have these dine arounds, and these great conversations come out of the dine arounds. And so just kudos. And you've been very acknowledged for this because you've locally won the Athena Award, and which is like the highest award that the local chamber of commerce gives out to women. But where added from Circle 200 and the family business, and now you're really engrossed in your community. And one thing I know too is that you are on a lot of boards, Liz, or you have been throughout the
Hmm.
course of time. And how do you feel like you've shaped the community through that? Like being on a
I
board, a
think
woman on these boards, and particularly
I
being a
think
woman
that
on the boards.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've one of our previous guests, Tara Wilson, she and I have done a number of like panel talks, if you will, on this exact subject. And I think that you work really hard, you play well with others, you show leadership. You don't always agree with everything that everybody says, but you disagree cordially and respectfully, and work it so that the solution is a win for everybody, right? You can't come at it so abrasively, is I guess
Mhm.
what I'm trying to say. And because of that, and because I think my leadership approach, resonated with different people. I was put in positions of leadership on these boards, and eventually chaired most of the boards that I went on. I ended
Big
up chairing
surprise.
the board, which is both a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
you know? Um, but but when Tara and I have talked about it, because she has been in a similar situation, we feel immense pressure. I will always say that when I go onto a new board, I don't care that I've chaired 5 boards in the past. Every new board, you have to prove yourself all
Mhm.
over again. And you need to be a great board member. You need to like give it the time and energy. And I have mostly been good at that. There have been a couple of boards that I'm like, I did not think I did great at it. And in all those cases, I resigned from the board. fairly quickly because it just didn't the board didn't connect with me for whatever reason, and, but the other thing is you've got to part of what Circle 200 does is it introduces you to this entire network of incredible, successful women. And so if you're sitting there in a governance meeting or a board development meeting, um, and they're saying, well, who would be a good board candidate? You can give them I mean, I literally go through Circle 200. And I say, well, if you're looking for a marketing person, this person. If you're looking for a finance person, this person. If you need to raise money, this person. Because we have such incredible talent in this pool of women.
Mhm.
And so part of what I feel my thing is that I normalize having women on the board, and then I help to expand it, so that more women follow behind me. And you do that by being a a good director and a good leader. Um,
Well, you're definitely not just a good leader, Liz, an exceptional, extraordinary leader. And I just want to take it back to you came back to work in your family's business, right? Because this you
mhm,
just talked about everything that you give back to the community, which is
mhm,
incredible. But you also, while doing this for the community,
mhm.
your family, made a very good investment getting you back here, right? Because Riggs Asset Management, which is your family's, the company that you and your family started. Well, your dad actually started it,
Mhm,
and I want to get back to your dad through this too, because um, so you take this chance to come back, spend more time with your family, actually go into business with your family in finance. A company that your dad started, if I'm correct with my facts here, at about 50 years old. Um,
50,
50,
actually 55 or
okay,
56.
okay, 55,
Yeah.
56. Okay, so he decides to start a company when most people are thinking about, how am I going to
Exit, right?
Am I gonna exit? He's like, "I'm gonna jump all in right now,
I know.
and with my kids and do this thing." And, you all end up building this incredibly successful company. Your dad's now, let's say older. I don't know if he minds us saying he's in his 90s, and
Yeah.
still active and going for it. But you decide also at one point, so Riggs Asset Management, obviously success story. Then you decide that your dad's story needs to be told, right? The story
Mhm,
of his time in the military, um, even before you were born, or maybe sort of at the cusp of it.
mhm.
Why did you decide it was time to tell that story? Because you helped write a book, and it's an absolutely incredible book. I want you to tell people the title and everything about it, because everybody needs to read this book. So tell me why at that time? Why was it the right time to write the book and tell your dad's story?
Well, before we go to the book, I do want to say that, I don't want to give short shrift to what I do for a living because actually,
Go for it. Yeah.
what I do for a living is really important and very impactful, to women. So I came back. I learned the business for investment advisory firm. My father started at 56. My brother is in the business. We have an incredible team. We grew it from, my dad, had himself and an employee when he started the business. Today we've got 11 employees,
Wow.
and we represent people all across the world. I mean, it's a big business. And my brother and I bought my dad out in 2008, right before the financial crisis. Our timing was impeccable. But um and so my brother and I have owned the business, along with, my sister has a small interest in it, um, for the last 17, 18 years. And in that time, I took what I did, at the community level, and I put that into the business too. I was just thinking about this the other day. I have a meeting tomorrow with a client who lost her wife, about 2 weeks ago, and, you know, it's hard when you're facing that and you need somebody. I think one of my superpowers is that I give strength to people and I empower them and I am honest with them.
Yeah.
even when honesty is not like fun to be. Um, and so I have focused my practice primarily on women. Now I have family groups that I work with. But a lot of times the reason why I'm working with those family groups is because the husband is saying, I want somebody that my wife can trust when I pass away. And I get so much um like goodness out of what I do for a living. I absolutely love it. I work 7 days a week. I love it that much. I mean, I just love it. I just wanted to put that out there because it really is a big part of my life and part of what I'm doing with women for women.
And Liz, inside of when you say you're working with them, what does that mean? What are you doing with them with their finances? Like, if somebody came to you and said, "I want to work with you, Liz," what does that mean?
Mhm. So I help them mainly manage through transitions. I manage their money. I'm an investment advisor. I do tons of research. We do all of our investing in house. We're really, really good at what we do. And but where the value comes in to them is like, I do this for a living. It's like going to your attorney, right? You wouldn't say, "You know what? I'm gonna draft my own will." You're gonna go to the attorney who's gonna draft it for you because they actually know the right way to draft it, to help you avoid a lot of issues. I'm like that on the finance side. So if somebody's, just, going through a divorce or just lost a spouse or looking to retire or wants to, fund education for kids or nephews or whatever, I'm that person that they say, "Liz, how do I do it?" I have women business owners who say, "I want to exit. What number do I need to get in my exit?" And we do a lot of work to back into that number, and I'm like, "This is the range that you should be negotiating at to get that number." And then, so those are the types of things that I do, and every day is different. And then on top of it, I'm running a business, a very, you know, good sized business, managing, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so there's a lot of responsibility with that. And my brother is the president of the company, but he and I work, like partners on it. And we have an incredible team. Like, I can't say enough about my team. They are the very best. They are professionals and they have such humanity. I love every single one of them. I consider them family.
Well, I think
So,
that comes from the top, Liz, because you shared with me that you have lunch every single day together as a team.
we do. We do. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of times, I mean, it's not mandatory by any stretch, but we enjoy each other so much and we're so connected to each other that yeah, we sit down and we break bread and we don't talk about business, we talk about each other's lives and we're just really connected. We have really created what I consider to be um like one of the standout family businesses.
Mhm.
Family owned, family run, family first. And I'm just very proud of it. So but you wanna ask about my dad's book, which
Yeah, but
was,
I'm glad you brought it back to all that because I didn't mean to skip over it. I'm just like, there's so much. I feel like we need 3
I
Liz
know,
episodes, right?
I know.
Because I have so much to
Either
unpack
that or
with
I'm just
you.
a
I
very
still have
verbose talker.
I'm like, I had 10 more questions, but I'm like, there's no time, right? So thank you. But yeah, let's talk a little bit
So,
about that.
so we sort of, I alluded to it earlier, but my dad, was in Vietnam. He had, 4, tours in Vietnam. First as an early advisor before the war actually started, and then 3 more, as a fighter pilot. And most of those tours, all except for the last tour, were pre-Liz. Okay, I was not born. My brother and
Yeah.
sister got to experience, having your dad go off to war, but not until I was a toddler did I experience it. And so when I was like, I don't know, 18, 19 years old, my dad and I were, hanging out talking, and he tells me a story from Vietnam. And I was like, Dad, I don't really know about that part of your life. I would love to know why you joined the military, like what drove you to service, why how you fell in love with planes and flying and all of that. And so he started then he said, you're right. You should know because I was gone for much of your childhood. You should know why it was important for me to do what I was doing. And so he started dictating cassette tapes at night when he'd have, like, after dinner, he'd sit down with scotch or, Irish whiskey, and he'd pull out, the old handheld tape recorder, and he'd start to dictate these cassette tapes. And he would send them to me. And for years, like, we did this project for years, and I had all of these cassette tapes, and I'd get them and I'd listen to them. Back then we had Walkmans. I'm really aging myself. I'd listen to them walking or whatever. And he was just dictating to his daughter his life story so that she would understand. And a few years ago, we brought into our firm a guy who's become a really close friend. He's probably one of my dad's best friends, and he's like 40 something years old, and he's a fighter pilot, many like a generation after my father, with the Air Force. He was a really well decorated pilot and a Thunderbird, and just he's all around really cool guy. And he said to my dad, "You should write a book." He said, "You have so much leadership lessons and incredible stories. You really need to write a book." And he said, "Well, I did these tapes for Liz for years. I'm sure we've got all the stories on tape." And so he came to me and he said, can we put that into, a book, maybe just for the family and a couple of friends?" And I said, "Sure, yeah." So we digitized them, um I got them transcribed and, all of this kind of stuff. And so we had like a ream of stories here. And then he was like, "Well, maybe it should be for more than just the family." So then he and I delved. Now he's like, when we started this project in earnest, he was like 89, 90 years old. And I'm like, "Well, with Amazon and self-publishing, it's totally doable. I don't know how you do it, but I'll figure it out." And so we started down this path of self-publishing. And the reception has been beyond our wildest dreams. I
Awesome.
mean, literally, we took a book that was geared towards the family and we distilled it. We just focused it on his time in Vietnam. There's a lot of
Mhm.
other stories out there beyond that, but we felt like that was the most impactful
Mhm.
period, and and it's been incredible. And what's interesting is the audience that loves his book the most, women.
I'm not surprised. It's
No,
just
we were totally surprised. We
I
figured, all the guys would want to read about the adventures and stuff like that, but it's the women that have been most interested in this book.
yeah. I mean, I have sons, so I'm interested from that perspective, and
Mhm.
I'm fascinated by by anybody who would put themselves in harm's way like that. It's just, like, so meaningful to me and touching. Like, it's I don't know, it gets me somewhere I can't quite describe, right? The
Yeah.
idea of service in that way and the way your dad did it, and putting himself in these situations that would be most people's nightmares, like literal, not like
Mhm.
I'm not saying that figuratively. I am saying you read this
Mhm.
book and he is in situations that would be my literal nightmare, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And he chose to keep going back. Like, that's how
Yeah.
committed he was, right? Like,
Right.
and that to me is just like, I can't wrap my head around that kind of courage, but I am so happy and so proud that there are people out there like your dad who have it and who
Mhm.
have done that for their country, and over again. So I can see that. But yeah, I can see why it'd be surprising, but also as a woman who, is
I think it was an insight. He wrote it, um, as if he was telling the story one-on-one to his
yeah,
daughter, right? I mean, that's where this
good.
came
There
from,
you
and
go.
that's
Yeah.
why it reads that way.
Mhm.
Now we edited it out because, he would be saying, "Now, Liz, I'm gonna tell you a story." And we would take out the, "Now, Liz, I'm gonna tell you a story," kind of thing. But literally, I mean, for the most part, other than some grammatical stuff and, it's pretty true to the transcriptions that, he did, 30 plus years ago. And, and and I think that for women, they get an insight into a world that they almost never have access to. And I think that's why so many women have really enjoyed reading these stories about, what it's like to be in war. The fact that one of the things that blew me away was, I don't know why it blew me away, but it totally did. He's like, you don't fight war healthy. You're not in peak condition at war. You're in miserable living conditions. You're not eating enough. You're not eating nutritionally. You're sick with, dysentery or malaria, and you've got to go out and fight war. And I'm like, oh my God, it never occurred to me. When I think of war, I think of the Hollywood version, I mean, everybody looks really handsome and fit and they're ready to go.
Yeah.
And that's not what it is.
No. God, so much to say about that too. I mean, we definitely have to do an episode at some point, and if we could get your dad on it, that would be amazing. Because there's
Yeah.
so much
Yeah.
more to talk about here. It just
Hmm.
it could be it's an entire episode itself. And I want to say is maybe just sort of bring it all together,
Hmm.
in this incredible life story that you just touched the surface of, in this interview or this conversation. Um, where does Spark Me fall in all that? And why is this important to you at this time?
I think for me, it's a continuation of a thread that's been going through my life since that strategic planning meeting with WBL idea. And
Mhm,
that is working with and empowering women
mhm,
and bringing them, support and positivity and strength. And that is what Spark Me is designed to do.
mhm,
It's the old adage of like, you know, I won't tell the joke because it's like, 18 minutes long, but essentially when a friend falls into a hole and you jump down, with them and you say, I've been down here before. I know how to get us out. Like, I feel like that is what we're doing with Spark Me. We we have been there. You have gone through all the things. I have gone through some of the things. We are bringing in guests who are educating us, and we just want to connect with women in this chapter of their life and provide support and community, and I think that's just a continuation of sort of the thread of my life.
absolutely. You make women feel seen, you empower them, you give them resources, and you lift them up and you create community. That's another thing I think you do everywhere you go is you create a community, whether that's on a small scale at Riggs Asset Management where you're doing it with your team or on a larger scale with Circle 200. Or on an even bigger scale with Spark Me, right? It's different forms of community, different scales of community, and I think that's something that you're very gifted at creating. Um,
Thank you.
this has been so rich. I every time I talk to you about your life, I learn something new. Right? I did not know that story
I'm
about.
like an onion. I'm like an onion, Michelle. You gotta
I didn't
really peel, peel and dig deep.
know black cars used to follow you, or that story about your dad and the oh god, too much. Like there's so much. But Liz, let's close this, even though we can't close it because we'll open it again to talk more at another time, just because I said it feels unfinished. First, I do want to mention we mentioned some people in this episode as if they're everybody's friends now, right? But in case this is the first episode somebody's listening to, Beth Toohey, Tracy Salingo, Christine Keisinger,
Tara
Tara
Wilson.
Wilson, thank you. We mentioned so many people that have been guests on Spark Me, and please go back and
Mhm.
listen to their incredible episodes because these are amazing women. But I'm going to ask you the question that we ask so many of our guests at the end of the episode, almost all the time, not 100%. But um, what is the one thing, and you can pick a younger self version of Liz, but what is one thing you would tell your younger self from now that you're here? What's some advice you'd give to your younger self?
Well, I think the first thing I tell myself is it's gonna be a hell of a ride. I have had so much fun doing what I do, right? So, like, don't worry about it. It's gonna be fun. You're gonna love it. Get ready. Um, if I were telling a young person today, look, you and I are both geeks over artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We share that geekiness and we're very honest about it. Like, we nerd out, like sharing, like, oh, did you do this? Whatever. We are on the cusp of such a transformative period in our world. If you are a young person, young woman, young man, you can literally do anything.
Mm,
Like, I literally think that if you have an idea, you now have the tools with AI to execute it.
yeah.
It is the most democratizing technology where small businesses will have the same advantages as large businesses. And I could not be more excited about what the future holds. There are going to be some downsides to this technology. There is no doubt of that, and we will have to deal with that. But we are on the cusp of one of the most exciting, creative, transformative periods in human history. I have
Mm.
no doubt.
That is such a great way to wrap this episode up because it's such a high note. And I love high notes. So with that, Liz, thank you so much for this just incredible journey with you. And I can't wait to put this out into the world and have people get to know you better and get to understand why I was so excited to take on this venture with you. And I believe it's giving something to the world that we both hoped it would and that will continue to do
Mhm.
so. So thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for being such a great partner in this. It's made the experience that much better.
My honor. Thanks, Liz.